The gunshot echoed through Riverside Park at exactly 2:47 p.m., freezing Dr. Sarah Williams mid-step as her coffee cup slipped from trembling fingers. 8-year-old Emma lay sprawled on the concrete beside her bleeding German Shepherd Atlas, while Officer Marcus Thompson stood motionless, smoking weapon still raised. This wasn't a routine police call. It was a family nightmare 15 years in the making. Martha Henderson's piercing scream shattered the spring afternoon as parents yanked children behind trees, phones capturing every horrific second. "He shot a service dog!" someone shrieked, the words rippling through the crowd like wildfire. Atlas whimpered, struggling to lift his massive head toward Emma's desperate, searching hands. The little girl who'd been playing Amazing Grace on the park piano moments before now sobbed into blood-stained fur, her white cane forgotten beside them. Grandfather Bill's Korean War medal caught the sunlight as he stumbled forward, recognizing his granddaughter's anguished cries. "Code Red! Officer down situation!" Marcus radioed with a voice cracking like autumn leaves. What the gathering crowd didn't know was that the officer and the blind girl shared the same blood, and that Atlas had once saved 3 children from a burning house. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 6 months earlier, Emma Williams had pressed her small palms against the chain-link fence of the Portland Animal Rescue, listening to the symphony of barks and whimpers that most 8-year-olds would find overwhelming. Born blind from congenital glaucoma, Emma experienced the world through sound, touch, and an intuition that often startled adults. "That one," she had whispered to her mother, Dr. Sarah Williams, pointing toward a corner kennel where a 4-year-old German Shepherd sat quietly apart from the chaos. Atlas had been scheduled for euthanasia that very afternoon, a gentle giant whose size intimidated potential adopters. But when Emma approached his kennel, something extraordinary happened. The 75-pound dog, who had cowered from every visitor for weeks, slowly approached the fence and rested his massive head against the chain link where Emma's hand waited. "He chose me, Mommy," Emma had said with the certainty that only children possess. The 18 months of intensive service dog training that followed had drained the family's savings and pushed Dr. Sarah to work double shifts at Portland Children's Hospital. $25,000 was a fortune for a single mother, but watching Emma navigate the world with Atlas by her side made every sacrifice worthwhile. The German Shepherd learned to detect Emma's epileptic seizures 20 minutes before they occurred, guide her safely through crowded spaces, and even recognize the subtle changes in her breathing that preceded anxiety attacks. Their daily routine had become a neighborhood treasure. Every afternoon at 2:30, Emma and Atlas would walk the 6 blocks from Riverside Elementary to the park, where an old upright piano sat under a covered pavilion. Emma's musical gift had emerged early. She could play any melody by ear after hearing it just once. As she played, Atlas would sit proudly beside the bench, his service vest gleaming in the afternoon sunlight, watching passers-by with intelligent brown eyes that seemed to understand every note. Martha Henderson, a 68-year-old widow who fed the park ducks daily, had become their unofficial guardian during these concerts. "That child has angels in her fingertips," she would tell anyone who stopped to listen. "And that dog has the heart of a saint." Martha's own loneliness had been eased by Emma's music and Atlas's gentle presence, a daily reminder that beauty existed even in life's darker corners. Grandfather Bill Williams, a 75-year-old Korean War veteran, often joined them after his afternoon medical appointments. The old soldier's heart condition was worsening, but he refused to miss his granddaughter's impromptu concerts. "Music heals what medicine cannot," he would say, watching Emma's face light up as her fingers danced across the keys. What none of them knew was that 15 miles across town, Officer Marcus Thompson was struggling with demons of his own. The 42-year-old police veteran carried invisible scars from his son Danny's pit bull attack 3 years earlier, trauma that had cost him his marriage and his peace of mind. Every large dog he encountered triggered memories of 10-year-old Danny's screams, the blood on the hospital floor, and the eye patch his boy now wore with quiet courage. The Tuesday that would change everything began like any other spring afternoon in Portland. Emma Williams walked hand in hand with grandfather Bill toward Riverside Park, her white cane tapping a familiar rhythm against the sidewalk while Atlas maintained his perfect heel position beside her. The German Shepherd's service vest caught the late May sunlight, its bold lettering clearly visible. Service dog, do not pet, working. At 2:15 they reached the park's covered pavilion where the old upright piano waited. Emma had been playing this same instrument for 2 years, her small fingers coaxing melodies that drew crowds of admirers. Today she chose Amazing Grace, Grandfather Bill's favorite hymn, and one that always reminded her of bedtime stories about her father, David, who had died when she was 3. "Play it slow today, sweetheart," Grandfather Bill suggested, settling onto a nearby bench. "Let folks really hear the beauty in it." His voice carried the weight of his 75 years, each word measured like the man himself. The Korean War veteran had been Emma's anchor since her father's death, filling the role with a tenderness that surprised everyone who knew his military background. Atlas positioned himself beside the piano bench with practiced precision, his intelligent brown eyes scanning the gathering crowd. A young mother with twin toddlers stopped to listen, fishing for her phone to record the heartwarming scene. An elderly jogger paused mid-stride, removing his earbuds as Emma's pure notes filled the air. Martha Henderson approached with her daily bag of duck feed, her weathered face softening at the familiar melody. "That child's got the gift," Martha whispered to a nearby stranger, her voice thick with emotion. At 68, the lonely widow had found purpose in protecting Emma during these daily concerts. "Been coming here every day for 2 years, and she still gives me goosebumps." As Emma played, her connection with Atlas was evident to anyone watching closely. The dog's ears would perk at certain musical phrases, his tail offering gentle metronome beats against the pavilion floor. When Emma reached for a particularly high note, Atlas would shift slightly, as if physically supporting her emotional reach. This was more than a girl and her service dog. This was a partnership forged in unconditional love and mutual dependence. Meanwhile, across town at the Portland Police Bureau's Northeast Precinct, Officer Marcus Thompson was reviewing the morning's incident reports when the call came in. "Unit 47, we have reports of an aggressive dog in the downtown area. Large German Shepherd, no collar visible, reportedly threatening children near Pioneer Square." Marcus felt his stomach clench, the familiar icy grip of anxiety that had plagued him since Danny's attack. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his radio. "Unit 47 responding," he replied, his voice steady despite the internal storm brewing. His partner, Officer Jake Morrison, noticed the tension immediately. "You good, Marcus?" Jake asked, concern evident in his younger colleague's voice. At 28, Jake had worked with Marcus for 3 years, but still didn't fully understand his partner's reaction to dog calls. "I'm fine," Marcus lied, checking his service weapon with practiced efficiency. The motion was automatic, muscle memory from 15 years of police work, but today it felt different. Today, his hands shook just enough that Jake noticed. The drive toward downtown took them through Riverside District, past the elementary school where children were just being dismissed for the day. Marcus's radio crackled again. "Unit 47, update on that German Shepherd. Witness reports dog is approximately 75 pounds, dark markings, last seen heading toward Riverside Park area." Marcus's pulse quickened. Riverside Park was always crowded this time of day. Families, elderly residents, children playing after school. A large, aggressive German Shepherd in that environment could be catastrophic. Images flashed through his mind. Danny's face covered in blood, the emergency room, the surgeon explaining that his son's eye couldn't be saved. "Step on it," Marcus told Jake, his voice tight with urgency that seemed disproportionate to his partner. "If that dog attacks someone—" Jake pressed the accelerator, but something in Marcus's tone worried him. They'd responded to dozens of animal calls together, but he'd never seen his partner this agitated. "Marcus, maybe we should call animal control first, get some backup." "No time," Marcus interrupted, his mind locked on the potential disaster awaiting them. "Big dog, crowded park, kids everywhere. And we handle this ourselves." As their patrol car turned onto Riverside Avenue, the distant sound of piano music drifted through their open windows. Emma's rendition of Amazing Grace carried on the spring breeze, a beautiful counterpoint to the tension building in their vehicle. Neither officer recognized the melody's source or understood that they were racing toward a collision between trauma and innocence that would shatter multiple lives in the space of a single, irreversible moment. Marcus Thompson's patrol car pulled into Riverside Park's main entrance at exactly 2:43 p.m., gravel crunching under the tires as Jake cut the engine. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the green space where families were enjoying the late May weather. Children's laughter echoed from the playground while elderly residents fed ducks near the pond's edge. To most observers, it was a picture of suburban tranquility. But Marcus saw potential threats everywhere. His trained eyes scanned the park systematically, searching for the reported German Shepherd. Years of police work had taught him to assess situations quickly, but today his judgment was clouded by memories he couldn't suppress. Every large dog he'd encountered since Danny's attack triggered the same response: racing heart, sweating palms, and an overwhelming need to neutralize the perceived threat before history repeated itself. "There," Jake pointed toward the covered pavilion where a small crowd had gathered. "Looks like some kind of performance going on." Marcus squinted against the sunlight, making out the silhouette of someone at the old piano. The melody of Amazing Grace drifted across the park, played with a skill that seemed remarkable for such a venue. But his attention wasn't on the music, it was on the large, dark shape positioned beside the piano bench. "Is that—" Marcus began, his hand instinctively moving toward his service weapon. "Looks like a big dog," Jake confirmed, reaching for his binoculars. "German Shepherd, maybe 75 pounds. Dark markings match the description." Marcus felt his throat constrict. The dog appeared to be in close proximity to what looked like a small child at the piano. Every instinct screamed danger, even though the scene appeared peaceful from their distance. "We need to get closer," he said, his voice strained with barely controlled tension. Jake studied his partner's face with growing concern. Marcus's complexion had gone pale, and a thin sheen of sweat was visible despite the mild temperature. "Marcus, maybe we should observe first, call it in." "No." Marcus was already opening his car door. "If that dog attacks someone while we're sitting here making phone calls—" He couldn't finish the sentence. The image of Danny's bloodied face was too vivid, too fresh, despite 3 years having passed. They approached the pavilion on foot, staying far enough back to avoid disrupting the impromptu concert, but close enough to respond if needed. Marcus's hand rested on his holster, a precautionary gesture that had become second nature when dealing with potentially dangerous animals. His eyes never left the German Shepherd, cataloging every movement, every shift in posture. Emma finished the final notes of Amazing Grace, and the small crowd erupted in applause. Atlas remained perfectly still beside the piano bench, his professional demeanor unchanged by the attention. To the gathered spectators, he was clearly a well-trained service animal performing his duties with quiet dignity. But from Marcus's perspective, filtered through trauma and distance, the scene looked different. He saw a large, powerful dog in close proximity to a vulnerable child. When Emma reached down to pet Atlas's head, Marcus interpreted the movement as the girl trying to control an unpredictable animal. When Atlas shifted position to better face the crowd, Marcus saw aggressive posturing. "Jake, look at the way that dog is moving," Marcus whispered urgently. "It's not responding normally to commands." Jake raised his binoculars, studying the scene more carefully. What he saw was a textbook example of a service animal at work. Calm, attentive, protective, but not aggressive. "Marcus, I think that might be a service dog. See the vest?" But Marcus wasn't listening. His tunnel vision, a symptom of his untreated PTSD, had narrowed his focus to what he perceived as an imminent threat. The rational part of his mind that might have noticed the service vest, the peaceful crowd, or the child's obvious comfort with the animal had been overwhelmed by fight-or-flight responses. Martha Henderson noticed the two officers approaching and felt a chill of unease. She'd lived through enough to recognize tension when she saw it, and something about the way the taller officer was moving, hand near his weapon, eyes fixed on Atlas, set off alarm bells in her mind. "Officers," she called out, stepping away from the crowd, "is everything all right?" Marcus barely glanced at her, his attention locked on Atlas. "Ma'am, we've had reports of an aggressive dog in this area. Is that animal under control?" Martha's eyes widened in disbelief. "Officer, that's Atlas. He's Emma's service dog. That little girl is blind, and he's been specially trained to help her." "They come here every day." The words seemed to bounce off Marcus without registering. His mind had categorized the situation: large German Shepherd, vulnerable child, public safety threat. Everything else was just noise. "We need everyone to step back," he announced, his voice carrying the authority of 15 years on the force. Grandfather Bill emerged from the restroom at that moment, immediately sensing the shift in atmosphere. The old veteran's eyes took in the scene with military precision. Two officers, one clearly agitated, approaching his granddaughter and Atlas. Something was very wrong. Emma, still seated at the piano, heard unfamiliar voices and felt Atlas's body language change. The German Shepherd's muscles had tensed slightly, not with aggression, but with the heightened awareness that came from sensing potential conflict. His training told him to remain calm, but his instincts detected the approaching stress. "Atlas, what is it?" Emma asked softly, her hand finding his head. The simple gesture, meant to comfort both herself and her companion, would prove to be the catalyst for tragedy. From Marcus's trauma-distorted perspective, the scene suddenly shifted into something far more sinister. The child was struggling with a large, unpredictable animal. The dog was showing signs of agitation. Public safety was at risk, and he was the only thing standing between potential catastrophe and innocent victims. His hand moved to his weapon as muscle memory took over, 15 years of training overriding 3 years of suppressed trauma. Time seemed to slow as he made the decision that would haunt him forever. The moment Marcus drew his weapon, the peaceful afternoon atmosphere in Riverside Park shattered like glass. Jake Morrison immediately recognized the escalation and stepped forward, his hand raised in a calming gesture. "Marcus, hold on. Let's assess the situation here." But Marcus was no longer hearing his partner's voice. His world had narrowed to a tunnel of perceived threat, where a 75-pound German Shepherd represented every nightmare that had haunted him for 3 years. Atlas sensed the sudden spike in tension and moved slightly closer to Emma, his protective instincts engaging as they had been trained to do. "Get back!" Marcus shouted, his weapon now fully drawn but not yet aimed. "Everyone needs to get back from that animal." The small crowd that had been enjoying Emma's piano performance began to scatter in confusion. Young mothers grabbed their children, elderly park visitors backed away in alarm, and phones started appearing as people instinctively began recording what they sensed was about to become a newsworthy incident. Martha Henderson, however, stood her ground. At 68, she had lived through enough to know when to retreat and when to fight for what was right. "Officer Thompson," she said, reading his nameplate, "you're making a terrible mistake. That dog is not aggressive. He's a trained service animal." Emma heard the commotion and felt Atlas's body tense beneath her hand. The German Shepherd remained in position beside the piano bench, but his ears were now fully alert, swiveling toward the source of the shouting. His training told him to stay calm, to protect Emma without showing aggression, but every instinct screamed that danger was approaching. "Atlas, stay," Emma whispered, her voice trembling with confusion and fear. She couldn't see what was happening, but she could hear the anger in the unfamiliar man's voice, could feel the crowd's energy shifting from joy to panic. What's happening? Why is everyone scared? Grandfather Bill was pushing through the dispersing crowd, his Korean War training overriding his 75-year-old body's limitations. He could see the drawn weapon, could read the dangerous situation developing around his granddaughter. "Emma!" he called out. "Emma, stay right where you are!" Marcus heard the old man shout and interpreted it as confirmation of the threat. In his trauma-clouded mind, people were yelling because the dog was dangerous, because an attack was imminent. Atlas's slight movement toward Emma, actually a protective repositioning, looked like aggressive posturing to the officer's distorted perception. "I said get back," Marcus repeated, his weapon now raised but still not directly aimed at Atlas. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the mild spring temperature. His hands, usually steady after 15 years of police work, trembled with adrenaline and suppressed memory. Jake Morrison made a decision that would haunt him for years to come. Instead of physically restraining his partner or calling for backup with specific instructions about Marcus's condition, he stepped back and reached for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. We may need animal control and possibly medical at Riverside Park." The seconds ticked by like hours. Emma remained at the piano, one hand on the keys, the other resting on Atlas's head. The German Shepherd's training was being tested to its limits. Protect Emma, remain calm, don't show aggression, but respond to genuine threats. His intelligent brown eyes tracked Marcus's movements while his body remained statue still. Doctor. Sarah Williams was just finishing her rounds at Portland Children's Hospital when her phone buzzed with a text from a neighbor. "Something happening at the park with Emma. Police are there." The pediatrician's blood ran cold as she grabbed her keys and raced toward the parking garage, her mind conjuring a dozen terrible scenarios. Back at the park, Martha Henderson made one final desperate attempt to prevent catastrophe. She stepped directly between Marcus and Atlas, her small frame dwarfed by the officer's bulk, but her voice carrying decades of authority. "Marcus Thompson, I know your mother, Patricia. She comes to my church. She raised you better than this." The mention of his mother's name penetrated Marcus's tunnel vision for just a moment. Patricia Thompson had indeed raised him to protect the innocent, to serve his community with honor. But the fog of PTSD quickly closed back in, and all he could see was Danny's blood on the hospital floor. All he could hear were his son's screams. "That dog is a threat to public safety," Marcus said, his voice now mechanical, reciting protocol while his trauma-driven instincts took control. "I need everyone to clear the area immediately." Emma finally understood that the danger was directed at Atlas. Her 8-year-old mind couldn't process why anyone would want to hurt her gentle companion. But she could feel his tension, could hear the fear in the crowd's voices. "Please don't hurt him," she called out, her voice small but clear. "He's good. He helps me see." Those words, "he helps me see," should have been the moment of clarity that stopped everything. They should have penetrated the fog of Marcus's trauma and revealed the truth of the situation. Instead, they became the trigger for the worst decision of his life. In Marcus's damaged psyche, a blind child was even more vulnerable to a dog attack. Danny had been able to see the pit bull coming. This little girl would have no warning. The protective instinct that had driven him to become a police officer, now twisted by untreated trauma, convinced him that he was about to save a life. Atlas felt the change in the air before anyone else. His canine senses detected the shift in Marcus's body chemistry, the spike in adrenaline that preceded violence. The German Shepherd's training told him to remain passive, but his deeper instincts, honed by thousands of years of evolution, prepared him for fight or flight. But Atlas couldn't flight. Emma needed him, so he made the choice that sealed both their fates. He stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate, non-threatening. Atlas simply rose from his sitting position to stand beside the piano bench, placing himself more squarely between Emma and the perceived threat. To any rational observer, it was the action of a well-trained service animal responding appropriately to a tense situation. To Marcus Thompson, it was an aggressive dog preparing to attack a helpless child. "Gun!" someone in the crowd screamed, though Marcus hadn't actually aimed yet. The word sent a fresh wave of panic through the remaining bystanders. Children began crying. Adults shouted conflicting advice, and the peaceful park descended into chaos. Grandfather Bill finally reached the edge of the scene, his heart pounding dangerously fast. "Stop!" he yelled, his voice carrying the command authority of a man who had led soldiers in combat. "That's my granddaughter. You're about to shoot her service dog." Marcus heard "shoot" and "dog," and his finger moved to the trigger. Everything was happening too fast, the crowd was too loud, and the memories of Danny's attack were overwhelming his ability to process reality. Atlas took one small step forward, not toward Marcus, but toward Emma, responding to her whispered call of his name. Jake Morrison finally understood the full scope of what was about to happen. "Marcus, no!" he shouted, lunging toward his partner. "Don't!" The gunshot exploded across Riverside Park at exactly 2:47 p.m., silencing the piano music, the children's laughter, and the spring birds all at once. The sound echoed off the pavilion walls and seemed to hang in the air for an impossible moment before Atlas's yelp of pain shattered the silence. The German Shepherd collapsed to his side, bright red blood immediately beginning to pool on the concrete beneath him. Emma's scream followed a heartbeat later, a sound of pure anguish that no 8-year-old should ever have to make. She dropped from the piano bench to her knees beside Atlas, her hands frantically searching for the source of his injury. "Atlas! Atlas, please!" she sobbed, her small fingers finding the warm wetness of blood on his shoulder. "Don't leave me! Please don't leave me!" Marcus stood frozen, his weapon still raised, his mind struggling to process what he had just done. The fog of trauma was clearing, replaced by a horrible understanding of reality. This wasn't a dangerous animal threatening innocent victims. This was a service dog, a gentle giant who had been protecting a blind child. A child who looked so much like— "Oh my God," he whispered, the weapon dropping from his numb fingers. "Oh my God, what have I done?" Martha Henderson was already on her knees beside Emma and Atlas, her hands shaking as she tried to comfort the sobbing child while applying pressure to the dog's wound. Atlas was still conscious, still trying to lift his head toward Emma despite his injury. His tail moved weakly against the concrete, and his eyes never left the little girl's face. Grandfather Bill reached them, his own hands trembling as he pulled out his cell phone to call 911. "We need a veterinary emergency team at Riverside Park immediately," he said, his voice breaking. "Service dog has been shot. Also need an ambulance for possible trauma to a child." The crowd had stopped running and now formed a protective circle around the tragic scene. Phones were recording everything, and within minutes, the first amateur videos would be uploaded to social media with hashtags like #JusticeForAtlas and #ServiceDogShooting. Jake Morrison was calling for backup and supervisors, his own voice shaky as he tried to explain the situation to dispatch. He looked at his partner, standing motionless with a look of horror on his face, and realized that 2 lives had been destroyed by a single moment of uncontrolled trauma. Doctor. Sarah Williams's car screeched into the park's parking lot just as the emergency vehicles began arriving, sirens wailing across the spring afternoon. And she could see the crowd gathered around the pavilion, could hear her daughter's heartbroken sobs carrying across the green space, and knew that their lives had just changed forever. Emma continued to whisper to Atlas as his breathing grew shallow. "You're my good boy," she said through her tears. "You're my brave good boy. Please don't go to heaven yet. I still need you here with me." The chaos that erupted in the seconds following the gunshot transformed Riverside Park from a peaceful community gathering place into a scene of heartbreak and outrage. Dr. Sarah Williams arrived just as the veterinary emergency team was loading Atlas onto a stretcher, his massive form looking smaller and more vulnerable than she had ever seen him. Emma refused to let go of his paw, her tears creating dark spots on his blood-stained fur. "Mommy," Emma cried when she heard her mother's familiar footsteps. "They hurt Atlas. Why did they hurt him? He was being good." Sarah dropped to her knees beside the stretcher, her medical training warring with her maternal instincts. Atlas was conscious, but his breathing was labored, and the amount of blood on the concrete told her this was serious. "We're going to take care of him, sweetheart," she said, though her voice betrayed her own fear. "The veterinarians are going to help him get better." Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the emergency veterinarian, worked quickly to stabilize Atlas for transport. "The bullet went through his shoulder muscle," she explained to Sarah in quiet, professional tones. "Missed the major arteries, but there's significant tissue damage and possible bone fragments. He needs surgery immediately." Martha Henderson stood nearby, her weathered hands shaking with rage and grief. At 68, she had seen enough cruelty in the world, but nothing had prepared her for watching an innocent animal shot in front of a blind child. "That dog has never hurt a soul," she said to anyone who would listen. "He's been protecting that little girl for 2 years. 2 years!" The crowd's anger was building, directed squarely at Marcus Thompson, who remained standing exactly where he had been when he fired the shot. His service weapon lay on the ground where he had dropped it, and his face was a mask of dawning horror. Jake Morrison stayed close to his partner, recognizing the signs of severe psychological shock. "You need to get him out of here," Martha said to Jake, her voice ice-cold, "before these people decide to take justice into their own hands." Indeed, the crowd was growing increasingly hostile. Parents who had brought their children to enjoy a peaceful afternoon were now confronting the reality that police violence had shattered their safe space. Phones were everywhere, live streaming the aftermath to social media platforms where the #AtlasStrong was already beginning to trend. "How could you shoot a service dog?" demanded a young mother, her own children clinging to her legs. "We saw the whole thing. That dog wasn't threatening anyone." Marcus tried to speak, to explain, to apologize, but the words caught in his throat. The magnitude of his mistake was settling over him like a suffocating blanket. This wasn't some random dog. This was a highly trained service animal. And the little girl... As Emma was loaded into the ambulance alongside Atlas, Marcus caught sight of her face in profile. The delicate features, the blonde hair, the way she tilted her head when listening. Something achingly familiar struck him like a physical blow. Those features belonged to the Williams family. They belonged to his brother David. "Emma Williams," he whispered to himself, the full horror of the situation crashing over him. His own niece, his brother's daughter, the little girl he had deliberately distanced himself from for 15 years because seeing her reminded him too much of David's death. Jake heard his partner's whisper and felt his own stomach drop. "Marcus, did you say Williams? As in David Williams?" Marcus nodded mutely, unable to form words. David Williams had been his younger brother, killed in a car accident when Emma was 3 years old. Marcus had blamed himself for David's death. If he had driven his brother to the hospital that day instead of letting him go alone. The guilt had eaten at him for years, poisoning his relationship with Sarah and Emma until he had simply stopped visiting altogether. Now he had shot his own niece's service dog. The dog that served as her eyes, her protection, her constant companion in a world she couldn't see. At Portland Emergency Veterinary Hospital, Dr. Walsh worked frantically to save Atlas's life. The German Shepherd's condition was critical but stable. The bullet had indeed missed major organs, but the trauma and blood loss were severe. Emma sat in the waiting room, refusing to leave despite her mother's gentle urging. "I need to be here when he wakes up," Emma said, with the quiet determination that had carried her through 8 years of blindness. "He gets scared when he can't find me." Grandfather Bill sat beside her, his own heart condition flaring under the stress. At 75, he had survived war, loss, and decades of life's hardships, but watching his granddaughter's pain was almost unbearable. "That dog's tougher than old boot leather," he told Emma, trying to inject hope into his voice. "He's going to pull through this." The local news crews had arrived at both the park and the hospital, turning a family tragedy into a public spectacle. Reporter after reporter stood in front of cameras, describing the shocking incident where a police officer had shot a service dog. The story was spreading beyond Portland, picked up by national outlets hungry for content that combined police misconduct with animal welfare. Inside the hospital, Dr. Sarah Williams paced the hallway outside the surgical suite, her phone buzzing constantly with calls from reporters, colleagues, and friends who had seen the story on social media. She ignored them all, focused entirely on the twin crises of Atlas's surgery and Emma's emotional trauma. "Dr. Williams?" A soft voice made her turn. A young woman in scrubs approached hesitantly. "I'm Dr. Emily Chen, one of the surgical residents. I wanted you to know that Dr. Walsh is one of the best veterinary surgeons in the Pacific Northwest. If anyone can save Atlas, it's her." Sarah nodded gratefully, though her medical training made her acutely aware of all the things that could go wrong. Infection, nerve damage, psychological trauma. Even if Atlas survived the surgery, there was no guarantee he would ever be able to function as Emma's service dog again. Back at the police station, Marcus sat in an interview room, staring at his hands while internal affairs detectives prepared their questions. The shooting would be investigated thoroughly, his actions scrutinized frame by frame using the cell phone videos that had already surfaced online. His career was over. That much was certain. But the professional consequences seemed insignificant compared to the knowledge that he had traumatized his own family. Captain Reynolds, a 20-year veteran who had known Marcus since he joined the force, sat across from him with a mixture of disappointment and concern. "Marcus, what the hell happened out there? That dog was clearly identified as a service animal. Multiple witnesses are saying you ignored their warnings." "I thought," Marcus began, then stopped. How could he explain that he had been seeing Danny's attacker instead of Emma's protector? How could he make anyone understand that his untreated PTSD had turned him into the very thing he had sworn to protect people from? "I need you to understand something," Captain Reynolds continued. "That little girl you traumatized today, she's your brother's daughter, David Williams's kid. The same David Williams whose funeral you attended 15 years ago." Marcus's head snapped up. "You knew?" "I've known since the day you joined the force. Your personnel file lists David Williams as your emergency contact brother until he died. What I don't understand is how you could shoot that child's service dog without recognizing her." The truth was too complicated and too painful to explain. Marcus had deliberately avoided Emma and Sarah for 15 years, telling himself it was because seeing them reminded him too much of David. But the real reason was guilt. Crushing, suffocating guilt over the circumstances of his brother's death. David had been rushing to the hospital on the day he died, racing to be present for Emma's emergency eye surgery. Marcus was supposed to drive him, but a last-minute work emergency had forced him to cancel. David had taken his own car, driving too fast in his anxiety to reach his daughter, and had collided with the drunk driver 3 blocks from the hospital. If Marcus had kept his promise, if he had put family before work just that once, David would still be alive. Emma would have had a father. Sarah wouldn't have had to raise a blind child alone. The weight of that knowledge had driven Marcus away from the family he should have been protecting. Now his demons had caught up with him in the worst possible way. His untreated trauma had turned him into a threat to the very people he had failed to protect 15 years ago. As he sat in that interview room, Marcus Thompson finally understood that running from guilt had only made it stronger, and now an innocent animal and a helpless child were paying the price for his cowardice. The surgery lasted 4 agonizing hours. Dr. Jennifer Walsh emerged from the operating room at 7:23 p.m., her scrubs stained with Atlas's blood and her face etched with exhaustion. Emma had waited in the same chair for the entire time, refusing food, water, or her mother's repeated suggestions to rest. The 8-year-old's small hands clutched Atlas's favorite toy, a worn rope that had been his comfort item since puppyhood. "How is he?" Dr. Sarah Williams asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She had spent the afternoon watching her daughter retreat into herself, becoming smaller and more fragile with each passing hour. Emma's usual brightness had dimmed to a flicker, replaced by a quiet desperation that broke Sarah's heart. Dr. Walsh knelt beside Emma's chair, her voice gentle but honest. "Atlas is alive, sweetheart. The surgery went as well as we could have hoped. The bullet damaged some muscle tissue in his shoulder, but we were able to repair most of it. He's going to need time to heal, and he'll probably always have a slight limp, but he should be able to function normally." Emma's head lifted for the first time in hours. "Can I see him? Is he awake?" "He's still sleeping from the anesthesia, but you can sit with him if you'd like." Dr. Walsh looked at Sarah. "Actually, it might help his recovery. Service dogs often do better when they can sense their handler nearby." The recovery room was quiet, except for the soft beeping of monitoring equipment. Atlas lay on his side on a padded table, his shoulder wrapped in white bandages, an IV tube running from his foreleg. Emma approached slowly, guided by her mother's hand, until she could reach out and gently touch Atlas's head. "I'm here, boy," she whispered. "I'm right here. You did such a good job protecting me." At the sound of her voice, Atlas's tail moved weakly against the table. Even unconscious, he recognized his girl. Emma settled into a chair beside the table, her small hand resting on his paw, and for the first time since the shooting, she seemed to find a moment of peace. But outside the veterinary hospital, the world was erupting in outrage. The cell phone videos from Riverside Park had gone viral, shared millions of times across social media platforms. News trucks lined the street outside the hospital, reporters shoving microphones at anyone who might have information about the service dog shooting, as it was already being called. Martha Henderson had become an unlikely spokesperson for public anger. At 68, she wasn't comfortable with social media or television cameras, but her fury over what she had witnessed gave her courage. "That dog has been coming to our park for 2 years. she told reporter after reporter. "He's gentle as a lamb, trained to help that little girl navigate the world." What kind of police officer shoots a service animal? The Portland Police Bureau was in crisis mode. Captain Reynolds fielded angry calls from the mayor, the city council, and advocacy groups for both the disabled community and animal rights organizations. The department's public relations team worked frantically to craft a response that acknowledged the tragedy without admitting liability. Marcus Thompson sat in his empty apartment watching the news coverage of his own actions. His service weapon had been confiscated, his badge suspended, and his career effectively ended. But those professional consequences seemed insignificant compared to the knowledge that he had traumatized his own family. His ex-wife Linda had called earlier, her voice cold with disbelief. "Danny saw it on the news," she said. "Your son watched his father shoot a service dog on television. How do I explain that to a 10-year-old? Danny—" Marcus closed his eyes, remembering his son's terror after the pit bull attack, the months of nightmares and therapy, the way the boy flinched whenever he saw a large dog. Marcus had become a police officer to protect children like Danny, to prevent others from experiencing the trauma his son had endured. Instead, he had created new victims. At the hospital, Emma had fallen asleep in her chair, her hand still resting on Atlas's paw. Dr. Sarah Williams watched her daughter's peaceful face and felt a rage building that surprised her with its intensity. For 8 years, she had worked double shifts to afford Atlas's training, sacrificed her own social life to ensure Emma had the independence she deserved. The German Shepherd wasn't just a service animal. He was Emma's freedom, her confidence, her connection to a world she couldn't see. Now that connection had been shattered by a police officer who couldn't control his own demons. Grandfather Bill arrived at the hospital just before visiting hours ended, moving slowly with the assistance of his walker. The stress of the day had aggravated his heart condition, but he refused to stay home while his granddaughter suffered. He found Sarah in the hallway outside the recovery room, tears streaming down her face. "How's our girl?" he asked quietly. "Broken," Sarah whispered. "She keeps asking why someone would hurt Atlas when he was being good. How do I explain that sometimes adults make terrible decisions? How do I help her trust the world again?" Through the window they could see Emma sleeping beside Atlas, who was beginning to stir from the anesthesia. The German Shepherd's first instinct upon waking was to look for Emma, his head turning weakly until he spotted her familiar form. Even injured and drugged, his primary concern was her welfare. "That dog's got more character than most people I know," Grandfather Bill said, his voice thick with emotion. "Look at him, shot by a police officer, and his first thought is still taking care of Emma." The story was spreading beyond Portland, picked up by national news outlets hungry for content that combined police misconduct with animal welfare. Advocacy groups were organizing protests, demanding justice for Atlas and policy changes to prevent similar incidents. The hashtag #AtlasStrong was trending nationally, with thousands of people sharing stories of their own service animals and demanding accountability. But in the quiet recovery room, Emma stirred in her sleep and whispered, "Atlas, are you there?" The German Shepherd responded with a soft whine, his tail moving weakly against the table. Even in his pain, he was trying to comfort her. Dr. Walsh entered the room quietly, checking Atlas's vital signs and adjusting his pain medication. "He's responding better than we expected," she told Sarah. "His body temperature is stable, and the surgical site looks good. If he continues to improve, he might be able to go home in a few days." "Will he—" Sarah hesitated. "Will he be able to work again, as Emma's service dog?" Dr. Walsh considered the question carefully. "Physically, yes. The shoulder will heal, and while he'll have some limitation in that joint, it shouldn't prevent him from performing his duties. But psychologically—" She paused. Service animals can develop PTSD just like humans. We won't know how this trauma has affected him until he's fully recovered. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. A police officer with untreated PTSD had shot a service dog who might now develop PTSD of his own. The cycle of trauma spreading from one victim to another, creating new wounds while old ones festered. As the evening wore on, the crowd outside the hospital grew larger. Supporters held vigils with candles and signs reading "Justice for Atlas" and "Protect our service animals." The outpouring of community support was overwhelming, but Sarah knew that no amount of public sympathy could undo the damage that had been done. Emma woke just before midnight, immediately reaching for Atlas. The German Shepherd was more alert now, able to lift his head and look at her with eyes that seemed to say, "Everything would be okay." "I thought I lost you," Emma whispered, fresh tears streaming down her face. "I thought you were going to heaven and leave me all alone." Atlas managed to lick her hand once, a gentle reassurance that he wasn't going anywhere. In that moment, surrounded by medical equipment and the antiseptic smell of the hospital, the bond between girl and dog seemed stronger than ever. They had survived the worst day of their lives together, and somehow they would find a way to heal together too. But the road ahead would be long and difficult, filled with challenges that neither of them could yet imagine. The shooting had lasted only seconds, but its consequences would ripple through their lives for years to come. 3 days after the shooting, as Atlas was finally deemed stable enough for discharge, the first major revelation emerged that would change everything. Dr. Jennifer Walsh was reviewing Atlas's medical records when she noticed something unusual in his microchip registration. The information led her to contact the Portland Fire Department, and what she discovered sent shockwaves through the community that had rallied around the wounded service dog. "Dr. Williams," Dr. Walsh said, approaching Sarah in the hospital waiting room with a thick file folder. "I need to share something with you about Atlas's history, something I think you should know before the media finds out." Sarah looked up from where she sat beside Emma, who was gently brushing Atlas's fur as he rested on a specialized recovery bed. "What kind of history?" 2 years ago, before Atlas came to your family, he was involved in a house fire on Division Street. According to Fire Chief Martinez, Atlas went into a burning building 3 separate times and rescued 3 children, ages 4, 6, and 8. He suffered severe smoke inhalation and was hospitalized for weeks. The family who owned him couldn't afford his medical bills and surrendered him to the rescue where you found him. Emma's brushing stopped. "Atlas saved other children?" "More than that," Dr. Walsh continued. "Chief Martinez says Atlas is responsible for saving 3 lives that day. If those children had remained in that house another 5 minutes, they would have died from smoke inhalation. Atlas is literally a hero." The news spread like wildfire. Within hours, local television stations were running segments about Atlas, the hero dog, interviewing Fire Chief Martinez and the grateful parents of the children Atlas had saved. The Rodriguez family, whose 3 children had been rescued, appeared on camera with tears in their eyes. "Atlas gave us our babies back," Maria Rodriguez said, her voice breaking. "When we heard he'd been shot, we couldn't believe it. That dog is an angel. He risked his life for children who weren't even his own." The revelation transformed the public narrative completely. This wasn't just the story of a police officer shooting a service dog. It was the story of a police officer shooting a certified hero who had already risked his life to save children. The social media outrage intensified, with #HeroAtlas replacing #AtlasStrong as the dominant hashtag. Marcus Thompson watched the news coverage from his apartment, each new detail driving the knife of guilt deeper into his conscience. He had shot a hero. A dog who had risked everything to save children was now lying wounded because of Marcus's inability to control his own trauma. But the most devastating revelation was yet to come. That evening, as Sarah was helping Emma prepare Atlas for the journey home, her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but something compelled her to answer. "Dr. Williams, this is Linda Thompson, Marcus Thompson's ex-wife." Sarah felt her blood pressure spike at the mention of the officer's name. "What do you want?" "I need to tell you something. About Marcus. About why he—" Linda's voice broke. "He's Danny's father. My son, Danny. The boy who was attacked by a dog 3 years ago." "I don't understand what that has to do with—" "Danny was one of the children Atlas saved." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She sank into a nearby chair, the phone trembling in her hand. "What did you say?" 3 years ago, Danny was playing at his friend's house on Division Street when the fire started. The 3 children Atlas rescued. Danny was one of them. That dog saved my son's life." Linda's voice was thick with tears. "Marcus has been living with PTSD from Danny's dog attack, but the dog that attacked Danny wasn't Atlas. Atlas is the dog that saved him." Sarah's mind reeled as the pieces fell into place. Marcus had shot the very dog that had once rescued his own son. The cruel irony was almost incomprehensible. "Does Marcus know?" Sarah asked. "I just told him an hour ago. He's in a very bad place right now. I'm worried about what he might do." As if summoned by their conversation, Marcus Thompson appeared in the hospital lobby. He looked like he had aged 10 years in 3 days. Unshaven, hollow-eyed, his police uniform replaced by civilian clothes that hung loosely on his frame. Security guards moved to intercept him, but Dr. Walsh intervened. "It's okay," she said. "Let him through." Marcus approached Emma and Atlas slowly, his hands visibly shaking. Emma sensed his presence and turned toward the sound of his footsteps, her expression wary but not hostile. "You're the man who hurt Atlas," she said simply. "Yes," Marcus replied, his voice barely audible. "Yes, I am. And I need to tell you something. I need to tell you that Atlas once saved my son's life." Emma's face showed confusion. "Your son?" 3 years ago, there was a fire. 3 children were trapped inside a burning house. Atlas went in and brought them out, one by one. My son Danny was one of those children. If Atlas hadn't been there—" Marcus's voice broke completely. The weight of this revelation settled over everyone in the room. Grandfather Bill, who had been quietly listening, shook his head in disbelief. "Lord have mercy," he whispered. "You shot the dog that saved your own boy?" Marcus nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I've been living with nightmares for 3 years. Danny was attacked by a different dog, months after the fire. I've been so focused on that attack, so consumed by fear of dogs, that I forgot about the good one. I forgot about the hero." Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with the clarity that children sometimes possess. Finally, she spoke. "Atlas doesn't remember bad things for very long. He forgives people even when they're not nice to him." "I don't deserve forgiveness," Marcus said. "From you, from Atlas, from anyone. I let my fear hurt someone who had only ever helped others." "But you're here now," Emma observed. "That means you want to do better." At that moment, Atlas lifted his head and looked directly at Marcus. The German shepherd's expression held no anger, no fear, only the gentle intelligence that had made him such an effective service animal. Slowly, painfully, Atlas tried to stand. "Atlas, no," Emma said gently. "You need to rest." But Atlas was determined. With Dr. Walsh's assistance, he managed to get to his feet, favoring his injured shoulder but maintaining his balance. Then, to everyone's amazement, he took a step toward Marcus. "He remembers," Dr. Walsh said quietly. Dogs have remarkable memories for people who matter in their lives. He might remember Marcus from the fire scene. Marcus knelt down, bringing himself to Atlas's level. The German shepherd approached slowly, then gently nudged Marcus's hand with his nose, the same gesture of forgiveness he had offered to strangers who had accidentally stepped on his paws or forgotten to keep their children from petting him without permission. "I'm sorry," Marcus whispered, his hand gently stroking Atlas's head. "I'm so sorry, boy. You saved my son, and I nearly killed you. I'll never forgive myself for that." Emma stood up and walked toward them, guided by Atlas's presence. She reached out until she found Marcus's shoulder. "Grandpa Bill says that holding on to angry feelings is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to get sick. Maybe you should stop drinking the poison." The wisdom in her words, delivered with the innocence of childhood, broke something open in Marcus that had been locked away for years. He began to sob, not just for what he had done to Atlas, but for 3 years of untreated trauma, for the distance he had created from his family, for all the help he had refused to accept. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this right," he said. "I'll pay for Atlas's medical bills. I'll get the help I should have gotten years ago. I'll make sure this never happens to another family." Dr. Sarah Williams had been watching this exchange with a mixture of emotions: anger, sympathy, and a growing understanding that healing would require something more than punishment. "The medical bills are already covered," she said quietly. "The community has raised over $50,000 for Atlas's care. But if you really want to make this right, there are other ways." Over the following days, Marcus began the difficult work of redemption. He checked himself into a PTSD treatment program, finally addressing the trauma that had controlled his life for 3 years. He worked with disability rights advocates to develop new police training protocols for encounters with service animals. Most importantly, he brought his son, Danny, to meet Emma and Atlas. The meeting between the two children was tentative at first. Danny wore his eye patch with quiet dignity, and Emma couldn't see his disfigurement, which somehow made their interaction easier. When Danny learned that Atlas was the dog who had carried him out of the burning house, he burst into tears. "I remember him," Danny said, gently petting Atlas's head. "I remember his bark. He kept barking to let the firemen know where we were." Emma smiled, the first genuine smile she had shown since the shooting. "He still barks when he wants to help people. He's very smart." As the two children bonded over their shared connection to Atlas, the adults watched with a mixture of hope and amazement. From the ashes of a terrible mistake, something beautiful was beginning to grow: forgiveness, understanding, and the recognition that healing was possible even after the deepest wounds. 6 months after that terrible Tuesday afternoon, Riverside Park hosted its first annual Heroes and Healing Festival. The spring air carried the same warmth as the day of the shooting, but the atmosphere was transformed by hope, community, and the remarkable journey of recovery that had brought everyone together. Emma Williams, now 9 years old and radiating confidence, sat at the same piano where her world had nearly shattered. Atlas rested beside her, his service vest gleaming in the afternoon sunlight, a small purple ribbon attached to honor his heroism. The German shepherd's slight limp was barely noticeable as he maintained his perfect position, ears alert for any sign that Emma might need assistance. The crowd gathered around the pavilion was different this time, larger, more diverse, filled with faces that had become familiar over the months of healing. Martha Henderson, now a local celebrity after her passionate advocacy for Atlas, sat in the front row with a sign reading, "Community Heroes Come in All Forms." Grandfather Bill, his heart condition stabilized with new medication, beamed with pride as he watched his granddaughter prepare to perform. "Ladies and gentlemen, Emma announced, her voice carrying clearly across the park. "I'd like to dedicate today's concert to everyone who taught me that forgiveness can be stronger than fear, and love can heal what seems broken beyond repair." She began to play "Amazing Grace," the same hymn that had been interrupted by gunfire 6 months earlier. But this time her rendition was different. The melody carried additional depth, seasoned by experience and enriched by understanding. As her fingers moved across the keys, Atlas's tail kept gentle time against the pavilion floor, creating a rhythm of contentment that spoke to everyone present. In the audience, Marcus Thompson sat with his son Danny, both of them wearing civilian clothes. Marcus's police career was over, but his new role as a PTSD counselor for first responders had given him purpose beyond anything he had experienced in law enforcement. Danny, now 11 and no longer wearing his eye patch, watched Atlas with admiration rather than fear. The boy's damaged eye would never regain sight, but his ability to see goodness in the world had been fully restored. "Dad," Danny whispered, "do you think Atlas remembers the fire?" Marcus considered the question thoughtfully. "I think Atlas remembers love, son. I think he remembers every person he's helped, every life he's touched. That's what makes him special." Dr. Sarah Williams stood near the back of the crowd, no longer needing to hover protectively over Emma. The months of therapy, community support, and gradual healing had restored her daughter's independence and confidence. More importantly, they had taught Sarah that sometimes the worst moments in life could become catalysts for the most profound growth. As Emma transitioned into a new composition, Song for Atlas, which she had written herself, a late arrival caught everyone's attention. Fire Chief Martinez approached the pavilion with 3 teenagers in tow, the Rodriguez children, now 15, 13, and 11, whom Atlas had rescued from the Division Street fire 4 years earlier. "We heard about the festival," the oldest, Maria Rodriguez Jr., explained to Dr. Walsh, who was serving as the event coordinator. "We wanted to thank Atlas properly. We've been trying to find him for years." The reunion between Atlas and the children he had once carried to safety was magical. The German Shepherd's entire demeanor changed when he saw them. His tail wagged with an enthusiasm that brought tears to every observer's eyes. The teenagers knelt beside him, sharing memories of a day that had changed all their lives. "He was so gentle," recalled 12-year-old Carlos Rodriguez. "Even though the house was burning and we were scared, Atlas wasn't rough when he grabbed our clothes. It was like he knew we were just kids who needed help." Emma paused her performance to listen to their stories, her face glowing with pride as she learned more about Atlas's heroic past. "He's still gentle," she said. "Sometimes I forget how strong he is because he's always so careful with me." The festival continued throughout the afternoon, featuring displays from local service dog training organizations, veterans groups, and mental health advocates. Marcus had helped organize many of the exhibits, using his experience to create educational materials about PTSD and its effects on families and communities. One of the most popular displays was Martha Henderson's photo exhibition, Atlas Through the Seasons, documenting the German Shepherd's recovery and return to active service. The images showed his journey from the emergency veterinary table to his gradual return to full duties, culminating in recent photos of him confidently guiding Emma through increasingly complex environments. "That dog's taught this whole community about resilience," Martha explained to visiting reporters. "Not just bouncing back from trauma, but growing stronger because of it. If a dog can do that, surely we humans can learn the same lesson." As the afternoon progressed, an unexpected announcement drew everyone's attention. Mayor Jennifer Clark took the microphone, flanked by city council members and representatives from the Portland Police Bureau. "6 months ago, our community experienced a tragedy that could have divided us permanently," the mayor began. "Instead, we chose a different path." Today, I'm proud to announce the implementation of the Atlas Protocol, new training requirements for all Portland police officers regarding interactions with service animals and individuals with disabilities. The protocol, developed with input from Marcus, disability advocates, and animal welfare experts, required comprehensive education about service animal laws, de-escalation techniques for encounters involving disabled individuals, and mandatory mental health support for officers experiencing trauma-related stress. This protocol will be shared with police departments nationwide, the mayor continued. Atlas's story will help protect service animals and their handlers across the country. One dog's courage is creating change everywhere. The crowd erupted in applause, but the most touching response came from Atlas himself. The German Shepherd looked up at Emma, as if seeking permission, then stood and walked to the microphone. His single, dignified bark seemed to acknowledge the honor while remaining characteristically humble. As the official ceremonies concluded, families dispersed throughout the park for picnics and informal gatherings. Danny Thompson approached Emma hesitantly, carrying a small wrapped package. "I made something for Atlas," he said shyly. "My mom helped me, but I did most of the work myself." Emma accepted the gift and carefully unwrapped it, her fingers identifying the contents before her mother could describe them. "It's a collar," she said with delight, "with his name embroidered on it. It says Atlas, hero, helper, friend," Danny explained. "I wanted him to have something special, to thank him for saving my life and for teaching my dad how to be brave again." Emma fastened the new collar around Atlas's neck, replacing his everyday one with this gift of gratitude. The German Shepherd seemed to sense the significance of the moment, sitting perfectly still while the children fussed over the fit and appearance of his new accessory. Grandfather Bill joined the group, moving slowly but steadily with his walker. "You know," he said, his voice carrying the wisdom of 75 years, "I've seen a lot of healing in my time. War wounds, broken hearts, families torn apart by tragedy. But I've never seen anything quite like this." "What do you mean, Grandpa?" Emma asked. "I mean the way one terrible moment became the seed for so much good. Atlas got hurt, but he also brought a family back together. Your Uncle Marcus made a terrible mistake, but he turned it into a mission to help others. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us become the foundation for the best things we can do." As the sun began to set over Riverside Park, casting golden light through the trees exactly as it had on that traumatic Tuesday, the festival reached its emotional climax. Emma returned to the piano for one final performance, this time inviting the entire crowd to join her in singing Amazing Grace. Hundreds of voices rose together in the familiar hymn, creating a harmony that seemed to encompass all the pain, forgiveness, and healing of the past 6 months. Atlas sat beside Emma, his new collar catching the evening light, his expression peaceful and alert. Marcus and Danny sang along, their voices blending with the Rodriguez family, Martha Henderson, Grandfather Bill, and dozens of community members who had been touched by this story. When the last note faded across the park, Emma stood and took Atlas's harness. "Come on, boy," she said softly. "Let's go home." As they walked away from the pavilion, followed by their extended family of supporters and friends, Atlas's slight limp was barely noticeable. More importantly, his confidence was complete. He had survived trauma, maintained his purpose, and emerged stronger than ever. In doing so, he had shown an entire community that healing was possible, that forgiveness could triumph over fear, and that sometimes the greatest heroes come in the most unexpected forms. The little girl and her German Shepherd disappeared into the gathering dusk, heading home to a future filled with music, love, and the unbreakable bond between a child who couldn't see and a dog who helped her navigate the world with grace, courage, and joy. Dear friends, If you've lived 6 or 7 decades like I have, you know that life doesn't always unfold the way we plan. Sometimes our deepest wounds come from the very people meant to protect us, and sometimes our greatest heroes wear fur instead of badges. Emma and Atlas's story reminds us that healing isn't about forgetting the pain. It's about choosing love over fear, forgiveness over bitterness, and hope over despair. In a world that often feels broken, their journey shows us that communities can still come together, that mistakes can become catalysts for positive change, and that the courage to make things right is never too late to find. Whether you're a grandparent watching your family navigate challenges, a veteran dealing with invisible wounds, or simply someone who believes in second chances, this story speaks to the enduring power of resilience and redemption that defines the American spirit. What moment in your own life taught you that healing is possible even after the deepest hurt? Have you ever witnessed a community come together to transform tragedy into triumph? Share your thoughts below. Your stories of hope and healing might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.